Good afternoon, everyone. The British Council is delighted to have Nishan Perera in celebration of World Oceans Day and our efforts to raise awareness and encourage a conversation on the need for conservation and protection of the world's natural resources. Nishan is a marine biologist and underwater photographer and the co-founder of the Blue Resources Trust. Nishan has an interest in coral ecology, coral reef ecology, fisheries, and marine protected area management. And he is passionate about the oceans and marine plant and animal life. He has worked with the IUCN and is currently a member of Project Seahorse, researching seahorses, coral reefs, and sustainable small-scale fisheries. He is the author of Coral Reefs of Sri Lanka and has contributed articles and images to the Sri Lankan Airlines magazine Serendip, Explore Sri Lanka, and the Lifetimes magazine. Please feel free to put any questions you have in the chat because Nishan will be taking the questions up in the Q&A session. So any questions that you have, please put them in the chat. Nishan, thank you and welcome. Thank you so much for agreeing to come take time on this Saturday afternoon to share with us your knowledge and your passion, and also to highlight some very pressing needs about conserving all these wonderful marine resources that we are blessed with. Over to you.
Thank you, Mrinali. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining in. I'm going to do a short talk today just to let you know how it's going to go. I'm not going to give a very detailed kind of lecture or anything. What I would like to do really is to kind of introduce you or showcase to you the amazing marine heritage we have in Sri Lanka, what is being done in terms of understanding and documenting that through research, what kind of conservation related work is happening. And hopefully it leads to a little bit of a stimulating discussion. I hope some of you will pose some questions or discussion points, and we can talk further on specific areas, anything that is more of interest to you in the discussion section to follow. But my point here, my role here is to kind of put a few ideas in you, get you kind of inspired to think a little bit more about the ocean and learn more about the ocean, particularly in relation to Sri Lanka. So, which is why I've titled it as Marine Heritage, Research and Conservation in Sri Lanka. Right. Before we get into what we have, I think it's important to understand where we are. Of course, we are in Sri Lanka, but this is where Sri Lanka is, as you all know, where we are in the world map. Don't get too flustered with all the arrows and diagrams in there. But what I want to showcase to you is that Sri Lanka is very centrally located in the Indian Ocean. We are right smack bang in the middle of the Indian Ocean. So this has a lot of kind of influence on what kind of marine species or habitats or ecosystems we have, because all the major ocean currents in the tropical Indian Ocean, tropical as in the warmer part of the Indian Ocean, closer to the equator, all those major currents go around past Sri Lanka. So this brings a lot of ocean circulation or movement of water and a lot of food or marine food webs in terms of nutrients. In the water, you have these all small plants and animals called plankton, zooplankton and phytoplankton. All of this is brought into our coastal waters. And then, of course, you might have heard about the monsoons. Currently, we are in the southwest monsoon. And then during, say, October to or November to around March, we have the northeast monsoon, which comes from the northeast, which affects the east coast of Sri Lanka. The southwest monsoon right now is affecting the west coast. So this also drives a lot of strong winds and open ocean water, carrying all these nutrients, carrying all this plankton into our coastal waters. If you look at this, there are a couple of that black arrow and the red arrow just going around Sri Lanka, and also this other major currents just going south of Sri Lanka. So this influences the availability of food for animals. So this is very, very important because that impacts what we have in Sri Lanka. So I'd like to start. I'm not going to put a lot of text on these things. I'm going to go through a lot of images. So everyone knows in terms of our marine and coastal habitats, beaches. Sri Lanka is well known for beautiful beaches. This is a beach on the east coast in an area called Mankarni. between Trincomalee and Batticaloa. It's popular for tourism. Most of us enjoy going to the beach. So of course we have these beaches, and beaches are not just pretty, they are important habitats. There's lots of little animals that live in the sand. I'm sure you have seen all these little crabs, hermit crabs, and all the vegetation, all the plants that grow along the coastline as well. And then, of course, we have mangroves in many coastal areas, especially where rivers are entering the sea. You have a mixing of seawater and river water, which we call brackish water. It creates kind of estuaries, and you have a lot of mangroves. Mangroves are really important because they provide habitat for juvenile fish, small fish and other animals to hide. Because if they're going out in more open areas, they get eaten by bigger animals. So they use these mangroves to hide when they're small. And then they move into other areas when they're much bigger and kind of protect themselves as well. And mangroves also play an important role in trapping all the sediment or the mud that comes from rivers and preventing it from going into the open ocean. Because when it goes into the open ocean, it starts affecting coral reefs and other habitats negatively. So another important coastal ecosystem. Now, this is something that many of you haven't seen. So mangroves and beaches, most of you are aware. Beaches, everyone is aware of. Mangroves, most people have seen mangroves as well. Seagrasses. This is something that is found underwater, so not many people see this. These are usually found in sheltered areas where there isn't very high wave energy. So either in lagoons, places like Puttalam Lagoon, Batticaloa Lagoon, or in sheltered open ocean areas like where the Gulf of Mannar, so around Mannar area, the sea is usually not as rough as, say, in the south coast. So you get these seagrasses. Seagrasses are plants, and like plants on land, they need sunlight to grow, to photosynthesize and produce food. So they are found in shallow marine salt water. And they're really important breeding grounds for many fish and other crabs and other species. A lot of crabs use these. They're also the preferred habitat of dugongs, which are a group of marine animals who feed on seagrasses. Just like cows graze on grass on land, dugongs feed on seagrasses. Some of the turtles also eat seagrasses, so they also use seagrasses. So they are very productive, very important ecosystem that's also very sensitive and sensitive to human impact. So, pollution or boats anchoring or propeller damage from boats can have a lot of negative impact, but a very important ecosystem and found extensively in Sri Lanka. And of course, coral reefs. Some of you might have seen a coral reef snorkeling or diving, but even if you haven't, everyone has seen pictures, everyone knows about coral reefs, often referred to as the rainforests of the sea. They actually have the highest biodiversity in the world. So that means the highest number of species in the marine ecosystem, of course. Thousands and thousands of species, plants, animals, large animals, small animals, invertebrates, everything from tiny worms to big sharks. Coral reefs are a very, very important kind of habitat for ecosystems. They're very popular for tourism. So they have a lot of economic benefits for people. So a lot of the fish we eat spend part of their life cycle on coral reefs. They may, when they're small or when they're big, or they move there to feed on other fish. So the coral reefs are very important for fisheries, for the fish we catch and fish we eat, so for our economy. They're important for tourism. Many tourists come to snorkel or dive, so they generate indirect income for people like that. They're also very important in shoreline protection. Many of you must be aware that there was a lot of coral mining or damage to coral reefs in the south coast of Sri Lanka, and that has led to sea erosion. When the sea is rough, there is no barrier between the ocean and land, and the waves are beginning to wash away our beaches. So coral reefs actually help to protect our coastline from storm surges or rough seas. And when you destroy them, they actually have a very negative impact. So there are lots of other benefits. There are pharmaceutical benefits. There are certain chemical compounds in coral reef animals and in corals themselves that pharmaceutical companies are using to develop drugs, including sunscreens, but also certain cures for cancer have been derived from chemicals from coral reefs. So there's a lot of important things. Apart from the biodiversity and the beauty of it, there's a lot of economic impacts for our society from coral reefs. So Talking of some of the major species, I'm not going to go into detail of all of them, but let's highlight some of the key things in Sri Lanka. Of course, a picture here of a blue whale. Everyone knows this. This is probably one of the best known animals, not just marine, but in Sri Lanka as a whole. Everyone talks about blue whales because they are the largest animals found on Earth. And Sri Lanka is very lucky to have blue whales in our waters, even a resident population. This picture, taken by a friend of mine, was taken in March this year of Mirissa. You can see a blue whale diving to the bottom of the ocean from the surface. It's come to the surface to breathe, and it's diving. Now, this is not a fully grown blue whale. This is, a little over half-size blue whale. So it's a young blue whale. You can still, I don't know how clear your screens are, but you can see just towards the bottom, if you can see my cursor, there is a snorkeler kind of swimming down with it. Following the whale down, you can see the size difference. And this is, again, not a full-size blue whale. So you can see how big it is. This is a fairly young blue whale. So imagine an actual blue whale double the size of this. It's an amazing animal. It's a huge animal. And Sri Lanka is one of the best places in the world to find them. Then dugongs. Now, I mentioned earlier about dugongs. These are marine mammals. So like dolphins and whales, they are mammals as well. They feed on seagrass. These are very rare now across the world, and particularly in Sri Lanka. They have two reasons, mainly because historically they were hunted by people for food, and also because of habitat degradation or loss of habitat. So those seagrass habitats, many have been destroyed. So they have no food. So they also get entangled in fishing nets accidentally. Sometimes they get caught in fishing nets and they drown. So many of them have died. So there's a very small population left in the area between Jaffna and Mannar. So between Sri Lanka and India, in those shallow areas, you can find dugongs still. Sharks. Sri Lanka actually has a very high diversity or high number of species of sharks. Unfortunately, the number of sharks in Sri Lanka has gone down significantly. We used to have a lot of sharks historically, but sharks are very low in number in our waters now. They still do exist, mainly due to fishing. So we have been catching sharks for food as meat, and also with the demand for shark fin soup in other parts of the world. They have been caught and their fins are cut off and exported. So the shark numbers, this is a big problem. Sharks around the world are facing a threat of extinction because we are catching too many of them. Thousands, if not actually millions of sharks are killed every year around the world. And this is the case in Sri Lanka as well. So we do have them, but their populations are going down very fast. Now, this is also a shark. It is called a whale shark because it's the biggest shark. It's also the biggest fish in the world. The blue whale is the biggest animal, but the whale shark is the biggest fish in the world. And they are found off Sri Lankan waters. This particular picture, you might be surprised to realize, was taken off Colombo actually a few years ago. Whale sharks swim around Colombo as well, and around other parts of Sri Lanka. Again, it's a very big fish. You can see again at the bottom here a diver, a scuba diver swimming underneath it. And you can see the size of this fish. It's a very harmless fish. It doesn't eat anything big. It eats plankton and small fish. They're very gentle animals. And as a diver, you can approach them and swim next to them as well. Of course, Sri Lanka is home to 6 species of marine turtles. There are 7 different species of marine turtles in the world, and Sri Lanka has 6 of them that nest in on our beaches and are found around our coast. This is a green sea turtle photographed in Hikkaduwa. They are probably one of the most common sea turtles in Sri Lanka. The ones around Hikkaduwa are very friendly, and they're used to tourists, so you can get very close and photograph them. And of course, so many other things, colorful reef fish. A lot of divers love to see all the colorful reef fish. One of the most popular ones, this is a anemone fish or a clownfish. These are found in Sri Lanka as well. This particular one is found only in Maldives and Sri Lanka. It's called the Maldive anemone fish. And sometimes slightly weird stuff like seahorses. It looks a little bit, the face looks like a horse. It's actually a fish. Seahorses are found mostly in shallow waters in the northern coast. and parts of the Gulf of Mannar in Sri Lanka. But again, really unique fish. Tree horses are very unique compared to other fish because the males give birth. I don't know how many know that. Normally, most animals, females, give birth, they carry the young. But in seahorses, the females have the eggs, and once the eggs are ready to be hatched, the female can transfer it into the male. The male has a pouch in its belly, like how kangaroos have a pouch. They have a brooding pouch. So the eggs are transferred into the male's pouch, and the eggs develop in the male's pouch. So you actually have pregnant males with big stomachs, big bellies, and eventually the live hatch inside the pouch, and they come out as live young. So they're really interesting animals. Apart from looking strange, they're very unique animals as well, where males get pregnant. Now, of course, we talk about big, unique things. We also have amazing biodiversity in small things. Now, this is what we call a whip coral goby. It's a very small fish. It's a maximum size about 2 centimeters. This one, particularly one, was about 1.5 centimeters. So it's very small, like the nail on your pinky finger. So it's very small. It's on a whip coral. So this is, of course, with a macro lens and enlarged, but it's actually a very, very small fish. And this is just to showcase what kind of diversity we have in Sri Lanka. And of course, when we talk of our marine heritage, I think it's important to talk Sri Lanka being located in the central Indian Ocean. We are in the middle of shipping lanes. Historically, a lot of ships have been passing through these waters, and many have sunk due to storms, bad weather, or some kind of problem in the ship. Sri Lanka has a lot of shipwrecks. Actually, again, Colombo is one of the best places to find shipwrecks because the harbor of Colombo for a long time, for many, many hundreds of years, were a popular harbor. So a lot of ships have sunk off the coast of Colombo. This photograph is actually off Colombo, just west of our Colombo port. So a lot of these ships actually, they have a historical or cultural significance, but they're also very important in biodiversity because over time, these ships kind of transform into natural habitats. Things like corals come and settle. You can see all these red bits on the ship. Those are corals that have settled and grown on this wreck. And then fish come and settle. You get lots of fish that live in it. They're, of course, popular for fun scuba diving. You can see a diver swimming there. So for tourists to come and dive as well, they're popular. And even personally, I enjoy diving on them. But there's a lot of marine life on them as well. So just to sum it up, some of the highlights. I talked about marine mammals, so dolphins, whales, and the dugong. We have the one dugong. There are 28 species of marine mammals officially recorded from Sri Lanka. This is quite a high number when you compare with other countries. We have more than 200 species of hard corals. So you think you see a few corals and a few shapes, it's actually more than 200. I think it's 212, the last count. We have more than 900 species of fish in our waters. We don't know the exact number because we haven't done a comprehensive assessment or a detailed study, but we know there's more than 900. This includes more than 60 species of sharks. If you think that's a lot of different types of sharks. Seagrasses, I mentioned, we have 14 species of seagrasses. I also mentioned earlier 6 species of sea turtles. And some of these species of global conservation significance, that means some of them are threatened in the world or very unique or rare species in the world. And Sri Lanka is an important place to find them in the world, like the blue whales, some of the turtles, some of the sharks. So Sri Lanka is a unique place in that sense. But I'd also like to say, like I said, we don't know how many fish we have. There is a lot to discover. So this is the result of some of my colleagues who did a survey 2 years ago, where they, over 10 days, they went to 15 places where fishing boats come to land their catch, fishing harbors. Just a 10-day, 15 sites. And in that 10-day period where they were doing a detailed study of the different species, they were able to document 5 new shark species. Now, these are not 5 species seen for the first time in Sri Lanka. These are 5 new species recorded to science. So in the entire world, we didn't know that these 5 species existed. So 5 new species were discovered in a 10-day period when we did intense surveys in Sri Lanka. This included 10 new species added to Sri Lanka. So the 5 new to the world, 10 that we didn't know existed in Sri Lanka, we recorded. So that's what we call the range extension. And this included 1 new family or group of sharks that we didn't know existed in Sri Lanka as well. So just shows how much more there is to learn. So talking about learning, what have we done in the past? How do we know what we already know, and what is being done to understand what we have, and also through that knowledge conserve what we have? Because first you need the knowledge and you need to understand what we have, then we can apply that scientific knowledge to manage it or conserve it. So I think it's important. The 2 people in Sri Lanka's history, I'll get into a little bit of history now. In the early years, the 2 Bennets, as we call it, Bennett and Bennett. The first was a gentleman named J.W. Bennett. He was a British public servant stationed in Sri Lanka. And he was a very good artist. And he looked at some of the fish that were brought by fishermen and started sketching them or drawing them and naming them. And he published a book called A Selection from the Most Remarkable and Interesting Fishes Found on the Coast of Ceylon. This was done in 1828. The titles of books those days were quite interesting, the words they used, compared to titles we use now. But this is a significant book. The detail of the drawings in that book are amazing. If you can get your hands on it, it's a beautiful book to look at. It has been reprinted, so it's commercially available now, and I'm lucky to have a copy with myself. And Bennett also was instrumental in describing many new species to science. And many of these species that were first recorded for the entire world were first recorded from Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka played an important role in global taxonomy or identification of fish species because of J.W. Bennett. And he's the one who described many, many new species of fish. And several of them were first described from Sri Lanka and were first drawn in this book. There was another gentleman, E.T. Bennett. He wasn't much of an artist, but he was a bit more technical, a scientist, someone more like me because I'm a terrible artist. But he also described several new fish through this publication, characteristics of several new species of fishes from Ceylon, presented by Dr. Sibbald in 1832. This is more technical manuscript, but it's an important part of our marine research foundation. And at that time, in the 1860s, a French painter did a very important thing. He painted the coral reefs of Gaul. Now, how he did this was to go and see the coral reefs. There was no diving equipment available at that time. So he went in what is called a diving bell. It's a metal structure with a glass window. And he got into it and they lowered it from a boat. And he sat inside it, looked through this glass window, and started drawing what he saw. So those were the first images drawn of our coral reefs. So these are very primitive science, but very important in us understanding the habitats that we have. So this actually is the cover of the book of J.W. Bennett, Fishes. It's the title here, Fishes Found on the Coast of Ceylon. So this is the book I was talking about. Probably the most significant or a landmark publication in Sri Lanka's marine research. So then we come into a more modern era where exploration of our ocean grew. As this is important was the development of scuba diving equipment. This is after the Second World War as technology improved. In the 1940s and 50s, we started developing equipment, the scuba diving equipment that helped us to start diving underwater. And with that, there were several pioneers of diving in Sri Lanka. 2 of them were Englishmen and 1 was a Sri Lankan. The Englishman was Mike Wilson, who actually settled in Sri Lanka. He married a Sri Lankan lady. And eventually, Mike Wilson has an interesting story. He became a monk. And he was meditating in a cave for many, many years. And he was also a film producer. He's the producer of the first color film produced in Sri Lanka called Ranmuthu Duwa, which actually has underwater filming in it as well. Was produced by Mike Wilson, and one of the actors in that was Gamini Fonseca, a famous Sri Lankan actor of the past. So he had many influences on Sri Lankan culture and marine life and everything. So he, together with Arthur C. Clarke, famous science fiction author, many don't know, was actually a very passionate diver and ocean explorer. Mike Wilson and Arthur Clarke were very good friends, and they dived extensively in Sri Lanka, took photographs and documented that in this book called The Indian Ocean Adventure. They did 3 books, the trilogy of diving in Sri Lanka. The Indian Ocean Adventure in the 1950s was the first. Then they published this book called The Reefs of Taprobane, which was about all the reefs and shipwrecks around Sri Lanka. And at this time, they also linked up with a prominent Sri Lankan scientist and ocean explorer by the name of Rodney Jonklas, who is very well known in Sri Lankan diving circles. We consider him the father of modern Sri Lankan diving. And together with Rodney Jonklas, they did a lot of exploration, and along with that, documenting scientifically all the species and ecosystems we had. So that was a significant publication. And then, of course, not so much in the science part, but they wrote this book called The Treasure of the Great Reef, where they found a wreck of Kirinda in the Great Bassas, which had silver coins, and they documented this. But this actually triggered a lot of diving in Sri Lanka. To me, as a young child, I happened to read this book at my grandmother's house. She had a copy of this book, and I was reading this book, and it was so fascinating. I was really intrigued about these stories, and that was one of the books amongst several others that kind of inspired me to take up diving as well. So that's why I've included this. I have a personal connection to this book as well. So these are some of the pictures of the old days. People playing with hula hoops and getting it to swim. It was a different time, so there was a more of a fun aspect, but they also did important things for science. Again, this is a picture of a gentleman by the name of Nishan Perera, a Sri Lankan who was a pioneering Sri Lankan diver as well. He used to spearfish as well, but again contributed a lot to the knowledge we have. The reason I'm saying this is people like me and many others who now work as marine scientists are building on the work of these people. We didn't start anything for the first time. The work that these people did, in whatever way, is the foundation on which all of us build. And I would emphasize that hopefully the work that we do and inspires another generation of people to continue this work as well. And talking of a more modern era, we have better equipment now. So we have all sorts of research. A significant thing was the establishment of government research agency called NARA in 1983. But along with that, also individuals, NGOs, private organizations have got involved in research now. We have much better boats and scientific equipment. This is equipment, echo sounder that you put in the water that on a computer records all the sounds made by whales, and it records it for several months, and then you can download it and see when whales are moving through that area and the different calls they use to communicate. So you have a lot more technology now. You don't always even have to go underwater. You can deploy cameras from the surface or, computer-based equipment that helps you to understand the ocean. So again, this is actually a picture of me and one of our interns working on our project where we've deployed a camera to the bottom of the ocean, and we're looking through a screen to see what's on the bottom, and we record that and try to map areas as well. And then, of course, sometimes we still have to go underwater and do surveys. This is doing what we call a transect survey, document what is found on the bottom. Again, this is one of our staff that I work with, conducting an underwater survey. So I'm going to kind of close that there, and we'll talk about a little bit more in the discussion about some of the issues and threats. But I think like I said before, I'd really like to take this as an opportunity to instill in all of you kind of an interest in the marine environment. I'm sure all of you have some interest, which is why you've tuned in today. But to do more of your own research, look for kind of information about our marine environment, look for ways to get involved and kind of help conserve it. And hopefully, like I said, we need to continue this work. We are continuing currently the work that those pioneers did, but eventually at some point other people need to continue to do this, expand our knowledge base, learn more about those species that I said we need to, that await discovery. Who knows, maybe you get to name a fish or a coral or a whale or something as well. And kind of protect what we have for future generations, because we have a choice. We have a choice to see whether the future looks like this. This is a photograph from Philippines. You can see the amount of plastic waste in the water. So you can imagine what the coral reefs and ecosystems they are like. They're all destroyed. Not everywhere in Philippines, but in some places. So this is a child. They have to swim in this kind of environment, which is very unhealthy for them as well, not just the environment. So we have a future where the future can look like that, or the future can look like this. This is a picture of Pigeon Island, which is a marine protected area. It's a marine national park in Sri Lanka with healthy coral reefs, nice scenery. We make that choice by the decisions we take, the actions we do. We will make that decision on what the future holds. So that's what I'd like to talk to you about. It's open for questions and discussion. And thank you so much for listening. Renali?
Hi. Okay, thank you, Nishan. My goodness, that was a lot of information and a lot of new things. That was a lot of positive comments, and people are very appreciative of what you were saying. They wanted to know about whales, and I saw them mentioning humpback whales, killer whales, and beluga whales. So maybe there's some interest around whether we have those kinds of whales as well in our water.
Yeah, so I'll start with beluga whales. We don't have them in our waters mainly because beluga whales are found in colder waters. They tend to be found in waters that are much colder than Sri Lanka's. They don't come so close to the equator tropical area. So we don't have them. Humpback whales have been recorded in Sri Lanka, but again, they're not common. They're not what you would call frequently seen, or they don't generally they're not found in Sri Lanka, but they have been recorded in Sri Lanka. So occasionally one or two humpback whales will swim past Sri Lanka, but they're not regularly found. Now, killer whales are interesting. Killer whales are also primarily found in colder waters. Humpback whales also spend most of the time in colder waters. They come to warm waters only to breed, and they go to very specific areas, and Sri Lanka is not one of them. Killer whales also tend to be found mostly in colder waters, but you do have these small populations of what we call transient individuals that seasonally move into tropical waters. And Sri Lanka seems to be a place where killer whales actually come into. They're not seen in large numbers like in colder waters. In places like Canada, you have resident populations, hundreds of animals. You see them every day. In Sri Lanka, you don't, but you have these groups of 3-4 individuals hanging around sometimes, or a solitary animal, and they are frequently seen in the south, around Miris in the south coast, up north of Kalpitia area, but they do seasonally come in, and they are seen not in large numbers, but every year by people.
Okay. And they want to know whether the whales near Sri Lanka migrate.
Some do, some don't. So blue whales again are very interesting. I'll say that I'm not an expert on whales. I'm more, my background is in coral reefs, but I guess I know a little bit about whales. Blue whales, for example, most of the blue whales around the world migrate. They move between places for seasons. But current research done by people like Asha Divos has indicated that there is a population, at least not all the blue whales in Sri Lanka, but at least one group seems to be staying in Sri Lanka year-round. Then you have blue whales like what we call the Bridie's whale, pilot whales. Those seem to be in Sri Lankan waters year-round. They may migrate around Sri Lanka. So they may move from the south to the east, or east to the west, or, with the food availability, but they are in Sri Lankan waters. But some whales do move in and out, like things like the killer whales and stuff. The ones that are in Sri Lanka might be in Thailand or go to Antarctica and then come back.
Okay. I think also there was a question around how did you get into becoming a marine biologist? Because I think there's someone out there who wants to walk the same path. So if you would just like to briefly, talk about that.
I mean, I think I probably am a bit of a curious person instinctively. I like to question things. I'm always curious to learn about something, but I think I do owe some of it to my upbringing as well. My parents actually always placed in me an interest in nature, not just the marine life, but kind of giving me opportunities to be outside. And I also grew up close to the ocean because my dad was actually a captain in the merchant marine, so he was a sailor. So I spent in my early childhood a lot of time around the ocean, in harbors, on boats. So I always had this kind of connection to the ocean. So I'm very fortunate to have been exposed to the ocean at a young age. But I also have this kind of passion for nature and this innate curiosity to learn more. And then, of course, sometimes you need a bit of luck of opportunities to come your way to, learn scuba diving. But when I did get opportunities, I grasped them with both hands and got into diving and stuff. So I didn't start trying to be a marine biologist, I would say. I really got into snorkeling and I'm kind of spending time in the ocean, but then realized that there is a way to kind of maybe bring that and my curiosity and passion for nature together. So that's how it started, and it's just kind of organically gone after that.
Well, okay, so that's for the person out there who was really interested to know. And there was a question we were discussing earlier. Would you like to give us some details about the major threats that the marine species and habitats are facing in Sri Lanka, please?
Yeah. So I would say the number one, there are human impact is fishing. Not fishing as a general thing, but what we call overfishing or destructive, unsustainable fishing. So there are a lot of fishing methods that we use, most of which are illegal, but still continue to be done because our enforcement is poor, that are very damaging to the marine environment. In shallow areas, we use dynamite or blast the water. It stuns the fish, but it also kills all the small fish. It damages the coral. So we've destroyed coral reefs and our fish stocks. We also use certain types of nets that catch a lot of fish and damage corals. Bottom trawling, where big boats are dragging nets with weights along the bottom and damaging the seabed. This kind of stuff damages the habitat and kills so many animals, what we call as bycatch, things that we don't target, but they're caught and we just throw it back into the ocean. So you're killing a lot of animals. So this is very destructive fishing, and kind of increasing our fisheries beyond a certain capacity is a big problem. Fishing itself doesn't have to be bad. It can be done in a more sustainable method. Just like tourism, you can be a responsible tourist, and you can also go and destroy the environment while you look at it. So that's the problem in Sri Lanka. Coastal development, as we urbanize more, is affecting certain areas like Colombo, as I mentioned, has marine biodiversity. We still have reefs and lots of animals. There are corals off the coast of Colombo. I dive a lot off Colombo. But all of this is getting degraded very fast with the amount of pollution, the development that we are doing as well. And upriver things, changes in how we use our land. Our agricultural sector uses a lot of pesticides and fertilizers. And remember that everything we put, whether on land or in the water inland, within our island, eventually washes out into the ocean. In Colombo, every time you flush a toilet, it tends to end up in the ocean. So it's not a pleasant thought to think of. So all of this is going and causing a lot of problems. So there are a lot of issues with how we, pollute as well as destroy physically our coastal ecosystems. And unfortunately, in recent decades, a big problem is climate change. Now, this is a very complex issue, but the increase in temperature, sea level rise, and ocean acidification. So coral reefs and seagrasses are very affected, coral reefs particularly. I don't know how many of you have seen the news about the Great Barrier Reef dying a few years ago, because the ocean temperature for a period of time was very warm. It was about 5-6 degrees centigrade warmer than usual. So that is corals are very sensitive animals. Corals are animals, by the way, I'll just reiterate. They're not plants or rocks. They're animals, and they're very sensitive to changes in temperature and environment. So when it gets too warm, they die. So if the oceans start warming like this, as it is happening now, we have these corals dying. And this has happened not only in the Great Barrier Reef, but also in Sri Lanka. Large areas of reefs that were healthy just died. Sometimes in a matter of weeks, everything died. And the problem is this is a big threat that's going to get worse in the future. So while the human pressures are there, this is now this new kind of big problem that is coming on top of what we already have. So these are kind of the big issues we face with all our ecosystems, not just with Sri Lanka, but around the world.
And I mean, do you find that, I mean, what kind of impact are conservation efforts making? I mean, is it making enough of a dent, or is it still too little, too late almost?
I wouldn't say too late, but it's too little for sure. And the key here is that now I mentioned climate change. So now that's a complex issue that, it's difficult for Sri Lanka or one organization or individual to address. But the thing with climate change is that if we can reduce some of the other impacts, like the pollution, the destructive fisheries, or the, anchoring of boats on coral reefs and damaging it, or, all of that, if the ecosystems are healthier, they're better able to withstand the stresses of climate change. Think of this, if you are not well and you are weak, and then you have to then go and run a race or do some sport, you're going to struggle. But if you're really fit, you're able to withstand the pressures of something much better. So same with the ecosystem. If the ecosystem is really healthy and doesn't have so much human pressures, when you have the temperature rise and stuff, it's a problem. But maybe the level that it gets affected is less. It can fight it better. But now the ecosystem is tired. It's just been threatened and stressed in so many ways that it kind of collapses. It's let's say, the final nail in the coffin situation. So that's what we need to address. I think the last few years, the effort, the initiative to change this has improved, I have to say. There is more research done in the last few years. There's more people getting involved, which is really encouraging. And there's more of a public interest as well. Because for a long time in Sri Lanka, we care about elephants and leopards and yala, but no one cares about the ocean. But you can see that changing. Just this event, we have so many events, people joining in, people contributing, volunteering for cleanups. So there's more engagement. And when you have engagement, you can change policy and the decisions of politicians better as well. So I think the first steps are being taken. It's quite late for Sri Lanka compared to other countries, but it's better late than never, because we still have something worth protecting. We have lost a lot, but we still have something worth protecting, and some things can bounce back if you give it the time and the space. So we definitely need to do a lot more, but I see a small shift in the positive direction. So rather than be depressed and say, there's nothing to do, it's all gone, I like to look at it positively and say, okay, it's a big problem, but at least we are making small changes. It's the turning point, and hopefully it generates more interest, and it's a catalyst to do more in the future as well.
So what would you, I mean, I'm sure we have a lot of young people also listening. So what can be like, I don't swim. I'm sure there are a lot of people who don't swim. But what can what can everybody do? What is the small thing or the big thing, or what can we do to help
First of
this?
all, I would say gain more knowledge, like empower yourself with knowledge of what's happening out there. Read, pay attention. The internet is an amazing tool. Learn about things like coral bleaching, or what's happening to our coral reefs or animals, marine life, so that you can make better decisions. Because everything, what we eat. For example, I was telling you earlier that sharks are being fished for shark fin soup.
Yeah.
Okay. Now we can make a decision whether we go to a restaurant and order shark fin soup or not, because the more that people order it, the more that we kill those animals to provide you that.
And is it true they don't really use the rest of the shark? They just
No,
take
they
the
don't. They take only the fin.
Oh.
So that's a decision we can make. If you read up for yourself, I don't have the time here to list all the groups of fish that are threatened, but we say, for example, certain types of fish or groupers are endangered, maybe we can stop eating that. It's not to stop eating fish, but maybe we can stop eating a particular threatened group of fish. And then the fishermen don't have, because we blame the fishermen for catching it, but they're catching it because we are asking them to give it to us. Okay, so the blame lies with all of us. How we conserve, and with climate change, how we use resources. Do we waste energy, cutting down our energy consumption, fuel, electricity? We can all be responsible citizens. We can't sit and wait for governments to decide or someone else to do something. We can all do a small part. Yes, it's a very small dent, but collectively we make a difference. It's like an election. Your vote is only one vote, but when millions vote, it changes governments or whatever the future of a country. So think of it as a collective voice, and then you can share this knowledge. Just like I'm sharing with all of you, everyone can be an advocate, whether it's your friends, your peers, your family, that we can encourage. I know growing up, I mean, sometimes people have good intentions, but they don't know. I mean, growing up with my family, my mom, my aunts, uncles, who might have done certain things, that I tell them, oh, this is not a good thing. And people change even, and it's your responsibility to do that. So those are the small things. Of course, there are big things of governments deciding on laws, and wildlife department doing their job, and scientists doing the research. Yes, of course. So that's the first thing. And of course, like I said, more people need to be advocates, more people need to do some research. Everyone can't be a scientist or a public advocate. Some will, but everyone else can play a small role. And when there are movements, you can support it.
And also, I mean, just you were talking about the coral reefs and that we lost a large portion of it. So, what was the single largest contributing factor to the destruction of those coral reefs?
In recent times, it was the temperature rise in the ocean. So we had two major events, El Nino related events, 1998 and 2016. When the Sri Lanka's, the ocean temperature in the nearshore area in the surface is about 29 degrees centigrade on average. Varies between 28 to 30, but on average 29. So the water temperature went up to 35, almost 36 degrees centigrade. That's a significant increase in temperature. It only lasted for a month or 2 months, but that's enough for it to stress these animals and kill the corals. That was the single biggest thing. Of course, historically, we had coral mining in the south where they were removing the corals for lime, for the construction industry. So a lot of the south coast was destroyed, but that doesn't happen anymore. It doesn't happen anywhere in Sri Lanka anymore. But also pollution, fisheries, those things have been over a period of time destroying our reefs. But these events were kind of significant, where even reefs that were not impacted by humans, a little more remote reefs, suddenly died like kind of within a week. So I'm just going to answer one more question. There was a question that popped up about killer whales. I think killer whales, whether they're dangerous. I saw that. Not really. Look, they are not known to be aggressive on humans and attack. I know there are photographers and divers who actually get very close to them and swim with them. But they're animals, you have to remember, that are apex predators. They're higher level predators. They're very capable of killing and eating large animals. They don't consider humans as food. We have no records of them killing people. And through experience, we know divers get close to them. There's footage, if you look on YouTube, of killer whales kind of swimming right next to a swimmer, I think in New Zealand or Australia, where they're following them. They're kind of curious. They're very curious animals. They're very intelligent. So they're almost like fascinated by this swimmer, and they're looking at them. So they're not known to attack, but you have to be respectful of these animals, because you don't know behavior and you could trigger. So if you don't know the animal, and if you're not experienced with it, my advice is, if there's an animal like that in the water, for you to exit the water, not out of fear that this animal is going to eat you, but out of respect for the animal in its own environment. This is very important. I mean, even sharks, people ask me this. Most sharks, to be very honest, are not dangerous. Most sharks will bolt when they see a human. It's very hard to see them, because as soon as you glimpse them, the shark vanishes. Unlike the movies, they don't really come after you. They vanish. Okay. There are a few places where they got used to divers where they come close. But even the bigger sharks, like great whites, tiger sharks, you can swim very close to them and interact with them if you know what they're doing. I've not been with great white sharks, but I've been very close to tiger sharks. They've actually literally touched me and kind of swum right over my head and bumped me. And they're very gentle animals, but you have to really know what you're doing and be very careful, because you don't want to even spook it. Maybe it doesn't want to eat you, but if you trigger it, think of it like if you accidentally step on the tail of a sleeping dog, even your own pet dog, it might turn around and bite you accidentally. It doesn't want to hurt you, it's just in shock. So we don't know what triggers that behavior with sharks or with killer whales. So we have to be careful that we don't do that. It might then regret its decisions. It might say, oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bite the human. But it's different to a dog biting your leg when a big shark or big whale bites you. So it's more accidental, but you need to respect the animal as what it is. But yeah, they're potentially dangerous, but they're not aggressive animals.
Further up in the chat, I saw somebody ask what kind of resources there are if you want to train as a marine biologist in Sri Lanka. So I think
in Sri Lanka, look, we don't have many degree programs related directly to marine science, but there are a few programs that look at fisheries and things. But you don't have to do a marine science degree. You can do a biology degree, or you can do some other science degree and kind of get into marine science. But what I say is the most important thing is not just your academic learning, but your experience and skill development. If you're interested, spend time around the water. Get to know animals and ecosystems and the ocean personally. What you experience and observe and learn can never be taught in any book. And look for opportunities to intern. There are organizations through which you can intern, and you have to put in an effort. I mean, when I was coming through this, I have probably written to so many organizations asking for volunteer opportunities. Many don't respond, but you just keep doing it, and eventually you get an opportunity. You have to put in a lot of effort. When I was doing my studies, I volunteered at NARA. I used to even spend a bit of my money to join their expeditions and kind of go and help out and attend talks, go out in the field, volunteer as a diver, just to gain knowledge and experience. And that opens up opportunities, because what I see, I can tell you as someone who runs an organization now, is that we have a lot of graduates, but they have no practical field skills. And many are not willing to do that. So you get your degree and you're looking for a job. Marine science is not something that's going to do that. And I'll be very honest, it's not a career that's going to pay you very well. I think it's important for people to know this. If you want to get rich, you should go and do something else with your life. It's something you have to have a passion for. It will pay you and you can live, but you're not going to make a lot of money. But it's something that if you enjoy what you're doing, it gives you amazing opportunities. For me to get on research expeditions, to be on research boats in Maldives, in Indonesia, join expeditions, go and do stuff. That's something I like, but it's not something that everyone likes. It's not always fun. It can be tough work, but I enjoy being out there on boats, doing diving, collecting data. And to me, it's a great life. It's not perfect. It's like everything else. You have good things and bad things, but take opportunities to learn. The things I've learned more about coral reefs in Sri Lanka, I've learned just by diving, observing fish, and be observant. Even if you become a diver, even if you snorkel, pay attention, not just go and look and say, oh, it's very beautiful, but look at what a fish is doing. Why is it? Try to understand. This is the curiosity that's important. To be a scientist, you have to be curious. You want to question. If you have to create that personality in you. So if you see a fish swimming, watch it. See where it swims to. What does it do? Does it go and eat something? Then does it swim to one place and swim back to another place and keep swimming a certain pattern? Then you start understanding a thing called a home range or a territory. You start observing these things. Then when you're doing research, this type of fish swims in patterns like this. These are little examples of how I do it. Every time I'm in the water, I'm looking at things. If I'm not collecting data, I stop and I observe something to see what it's doing. And then because some of this stuff is not in books. It's knowledge that you build over time. It's not just with marine science. If you look, the best elephant scientists or bird scientists, ornithologists, they know so much about these animals just because they spend so much time in it. You have to spend time in that environment, pay attention. If you look at the ocean, when I'm at the beach, I'm looking at the pattern of the waves, what it's doing. Different months I see, this month always the waves come from this side, the wind comes from this side. This month it changes. So you observe these things. And I was a bit geeky, to be very honest. I used to make little notes when I was a teenager as well, because I was quite interested in this. Even if you don't take it to that level, you need to be observant and look for opportunities to volunteer, get involved, do some training courses and all of that as well.
Okay. We have a question about whether it's very harmful to be getting so close to the whales when we go whale watching.
On the boat, is it? I
I
assume.
am assuming
Yeah,
so. Yeah.
yeah, it depends how it is done. So the international accepted guidelines for whale watching is that there is a certain distance. I cannot remember the exact distance. I think it's 100-meter distance from whales that the vessel needs to cut the engine and stop moving. So you don't move the boat. When I say vessel, the boat, you don't aggressively or non-aggressively go towards that whale right up to it. When you see a whale, you stop at 100 meters and you can cut the engine, go on neutral or switch it off, and then the boat drifts. Now, in many cases, if you do it in a certain way, you know how, in the ocean, things are always moving. Okay, your boat is also moving even if you're not running the engine, because there's a current, there's a swell, the boat is gently moving and the whale is over. So abroad, what they do is they go in the up of where the whale is coming. So if the whale is coming towards you, you get up to about 100 meters, then you stop your boat engine and you drift. And if the animal is interested, it will come up. Whales are curious, like I said, just like the killer whale and the swimmer. They will come up to you. And if they're in the mood, they will swim right past your boat, they'll play around your boat, they will go. Or you will see it from a distance. Then it's not harmful. You basically place the whale in charge of the decision making. Let the whale decide whether it wants to interact or not. You don't charge towards the whale to get your guests closer to it. This is unfortunately what happens in Sri Lanka. When they see a whale, all the boats go, full speed right up to the whale, and then they're showing the whale, and then the whale dives underwater quickly. So you have to get there quickly before it dives so you can see. That's bad because you're stressing the animal. If the animal comes to you, it's different. Same thing with fish, everything when I'm diving. As a photographer, that's the thing. Underwater photography, you get very close. You don't use zoom lenses or anything. You use wide angle lenses. Because of the water, you can't use zoom lenses. Most of my pictures are taken within like a few feet, sometimes 2 feet away from the fish. So you have to know how to approach these animals without stressing it. An animal that's stressed swims away. And if you look at, when I do photography, the animal is always looking at me. So it's coming towards me, the face is towards me. That means the animal is comfortable because it's not swimming away. The picture is not of the tail of the animal swimming away. So you let the animal decide, you understand their behavior and do that. So that's important in Sri Lanka, unfortunately. Yeah, what they do in Sri Lanka of driving the boat straight up the whale to like 10 feet of the whale, not a good thing.
Thank you, Nishan. I know you have another session coming up, so I'm conscious of having to release you. You've taken so much of your time. It was such a pleasure to have this talk, and I hope everybody I hope a lot of our members have also logged in, because we have an essay competition based on what you have said for our members. And we also have a very special presentation tomorrow. Please go and look at it on our social media platforms. It was for the children. So we had an art sort of a presentation. You might find some of those pictures interesting, Nishan. I don't think you've seen those creatures underwater anytime soon. So, and I really want to say thank you to the British Council team. We had Shiroma and Shamil and Manisha and Nishika and Sajid. And we have a lot of wonderful resources available, not only in our physical libraries, but also in our digital libraries. So if you're not already a member, this might be a good time to check out what's available. You have to become a member, and then you can. I don't know whether you've seen what we have, Nishan, but we have quite a good collection of sort of resource materials on the natural sciences, in addition to our fiction and comics and journals. So that's it. Actually, thank you so very much, and I hope we get to work together again. Thank you from the British Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrinali, and I'd like to thank everyone who joined in. And like I said, hopefully this inspires you or triggers your mind to kind of seek more information. You can't learn everything in a 1-hour discussion with me or with anyone else, but hopefully you will search things for yourself. And I'd like to reiterate on the British Council thing. I used to be a member of the British Council Library as a teenager, and I I read another great book, The Silent World by Jacques Cousteau, who was the inventor of scuba diving. And I
Yeah.
read that there was a copy in the library, and I remember taking it home and reading it. So there are some resources. And so please do look for those and look for online resources as well. And hopefully you can also make a small contribution towards conserving our amazing marine heritage in Sri Lanka. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.